let's just move this around a little bit more so that I can get more in the center of the screen.
Yes, you should.
Okay, all right, yeah. That's good. I'm happy to be drinking in front of you. This is part of the regimen, you know. If you're going to take care of yourself, you should take care of yourself, right? This is part of the Torah of Yom Kippur. Let's figure out ways of best taking care of ourselves. So I'm happy to be teaching that kind of Torah implicitly. At the end of the section of prayer that is our personal pleas, it's a whole section of prayer, a modular unit in the Amidah that carries our pleas for the future. And the last one is Shema Kolenu. Listen to our voice. We've articulated all of these prayers, and we have done it the best way that we can. We've detailed them as much as we can, bringing our living experience right to the altar, as it were, right to you, right to ask for your help and for your assistance in making these things possible. But finally, at the very end, we say, Shema Kolenu, hear our voice. And we open the ark and we make a very big deal out of it. As well we should. This is our last chance at asking for that kind of forgiveness or asking for that kind of help in living our daily lives. And as soon as we say Shema Kolenu, we then say Al Tashlicheinu. Don't cast us away. And then we say, as if an afterthought, but not really an afterthought, Al Tashlicheinu la'ed Ziknah. Don't cast us away at a time of old age. Don't cast us away at a time of old age. And that sounds like a very, very, very bitter and bold last-minute bare-bones plea. Please don't cast us away. We're getting old. Our powers are diminishing. We have so little left to contribute. We really need to be existing because of your good graces and because of your good wishes and because of the good wishes and because of the graciousness of the community within which we live. And that's the way in which rabbinic tradition seems to treat aging, but not entirely. There is a sage who is a hero of mine, and he's a hero because of the way in which he considers age, and I want to share that with you. I want to share it with you in some ways because I'm getting older, and in some ways because I'm getting demonstrably older. You can actually see the ways in which I'm aging. And if you were to know my parents, you would know that in some remarkable, inexplicable way, except of course for your own genetic background, that I look like both my father and my mother as they got older at the same time. Yes, some other people certainly have learned that they share that either to their chagrin or to their enjoyment or somewhere in between, or maybe even both. But it's certainly true. And living life with cancer at the moment makes for a kind of a different angle on all of this. There are a lot of things that are converging, you see. There's the backdrop of your aging, there's a backdrop of my aging, there's the backdrop of us all aging in an environment which is somehow less certain and more threatening than it was 6 months ago. That makes some difference for us when people who are aging are told, well, we are of higher risk and increasingly higher risk. Not that I think I'm speaking only to a group of people who are in that demographic, but there are people who care about people who are in that demographic and who will soon be in that demographic. And I find myself willy-nilly to be in that demographic in a number of ways. One, because of my chronological age, which I've forgotten, but I think it's 69. Is that right?
I think so.
Yes, I think it's 69. And another because of the cancer with which I'm living. That I want to keep reminding you in some ways about it. At least I can stop reminding you about it. You know about it. But I want you to be able to see how it is that I am. Some of you have called me, have taken me up on the invitation to call and find out. And some of you not, but you're all invited to, just to find out, well, what's going on in that body? What's going on in that head? Not what do I project into it, but what's really going on there? What kind of curiosity, what kind of pain, what kind of a sense of resilience or optimism or I don't know, whatever other words you think would be useful in order to project some kind of a life inside a body that has a disease. It's a life that keeps on living itself, and it keeps on going, and it keeps on growing, and it is extremely exciting. And I look forward to every single day, especially the best parts of the day. The best parts of the day are parts of the day that are spurred on by Sabina very largely, although I'll take some responsibility and some credit for them. But they put me in mind of my hero, who says, my hero, Rabbi Judah Bar Shimon, Judah Bar Simon, who lives in the 3rd century in the land of Israel, and who's very conscious and very aware of aging. And when he says, if he says, Al Tashlicheinu la'ed Ziknah, don't cast us off at a time of aging, he says it with a little bit of an afterthought. He says it, don't cast us off. Don't write us off at a time of aging. We're just getting started. There's some things that we can do. There's some things of which we are capable, of which you, God, are unaware. That comes out in the Midrash, which makes him my hero, in this extended teaching on aging that makes Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon my hero. I can't really say, because of the evidence of the manuscripts, that this teaching originates with Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, but certainly it's one of its largest and fullest expressions is in his mouth, and I'm happy to adopt him as a traveling companion and as a hero. He has aging on his mind. He's thinking a lot about what it means to get older, and about the capacities of getting older. And I suppose about the limitations of getting older, but he's thinking about getting older in any event across the board. And he's a hero of mine, as all Midrashic sages are heroes of mine, because they see so deeply into the biblical text. They read themselves right into the Bible text. This story is not just a story about Abraham, it's a story about me. If you think that the whole story was told by Abraham, you are wrong. We fulfill and fill the Bible story. We fill in the white spaces. We are the ones who illuminate the manuscript in ways that the Bible couldn't do, because there's not enough space in the Bible to eliminate all of the manuscript, and all of the emotions, and all of the possibilities. We have in the Bible just the barest outlines of the story that need to be filled in. And each sage, each thinker, each reader, each fellow traveler who has on his or her mind the idea of being with those Bible heroes, living life in their company, looking into the story and catching a glimpse of themselves looking back. Each one of those people is in some ways a hero of what it means to read the Bible, and what it means to do Midrash, what it means to enter fully into the story. Let the full story enter into him or enter into her. So, for example, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon sees the following scene. That Abraham says to God, you know, it would be a good idea if there was some differentiation between the generations. If all generations didn't look alike. It would be a good idea if seniors looked like seniors, and if juniors looked like juniors. Well, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon is presuming something here that we don't know how to presume. He's presuming that everyone looks alike until such time as a body stops functioning and then a person dies, which is a little bit hard for us. But clearly he's speaking against the background of that story, It's a story that he doesn't tell because the Midrash doesn't tell every story behind every story. It starts where it starts, and it expects us to fill in the rest. But the story goes like this. We could find it and piece it together from other places. People, in fact, do mature and become adults, and then they look like what they look like up until the age when their bodies stop functioning. And we know about age. We know about people getting older and dying because there are huge bridges of humanity that are built in the Torah between Adam and Noah and between Noah and Abraham, which basically say that so-and-so, this descendant of Adam or this descendant of Noah, lived so many years, had so many children, lived so many more years, and then died at the ripe old age of 762 or 863 or something like that. So we know that the Bible has stories in it about old age. But that's all we know. We only know the statistics. We don't know anything about the dramas of that aging. We don't have a picture of what it means for them to age. And the fantasy of the Midrash is that people keep on going until they stop going. And then all of a sudden, the battery stops ticking and they die, but they look just like they did just like they did yesterday or the day before, the day before. And you might have to shuttle your shuttle back and forth through the loom a number of times before you understand the logic of this. But the logic of it starts to be apparent where Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon picks up this hero of mine, this hero of aging, who says to God, it would be a really good idea if people didn't look like they looked every single day until the end of their lives. How extraordinary would it be for people to be able to look up to a generation before them and see that this one is shorter, or this one's skin is more wrinkled, or this one looks more like his father, or this one looks more like his mother, or this one bows under the task of rising or lacing the shoe, or of addressing the kahal, the congregation, because there's a weight of age and aging that is on that person. And that's something to which I aspire. Living a life of that kind of dignity, with that kind of shifting burden, where there's something not as easily carried, but is valuably carried, that would be valuable to me. And so Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon says to God, it would be a good idea if people had something to affirm their view of the generation that comes, that has preceded them, something visible. If people didn't look like they looked every single day, and that it was a trivial matter just to go on and go on until you stopped going on. And God said, according to this Midrash, listen to this. God said, that's an extraordinary idea. And we should do it. I've never thought about it before. But let's do it, and it'll start with you. And so, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon now comes to the Bible verse with which all of this started in his head. Ve'avraham zaken ba bayamim. Abraham got old and got along, or as he was getting along in days. Avraham zaken ba bayamim. And Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, because he's thinking about aging, you see, he's bringing his own aging along with this in his teaching. This, he says, is the first time that zaken, age, is mentioned in the Bible. How extraordinary. Think about the early chapters of the Bible and the opportunity that they present to us. The introduction of themes, the introduction of characters, the introduction of vocabulary, the introduction of various motifs, of dramas. Where does love first appear in the Bible? Where does sin first appear in the Bible? These great dramatis personae of how it is that we pursue the Bible and read it into our lives and read our lives into it. How about aging? Who would think to look for that? Well, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon thinks to look for it. He looks for it. He finds it. The Avraham Zaken Ba Bayamim. Here is a pronouncement from God. Abraham got old. while he was coming along in days. And I say it that way because these seem to be synonymous parallelism, or represent synonymous parallelism. The Avraham Zaken, Abraham became old. Zaken, Zakan means beard. Ziknah is age. The Avraham Zaken, Ba Bayamim. Abraham was old. Enough. Does God get paid by the word? What? You have to have yet another phrase to explain age? But no, we do have another phrase. Ba Bayamim, coming along in days. Do they mean exactly the same thing? You might think so. But in my inner world, the world that I share with Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, they do not mean the same thing at all. Avraham Zaken is brand new. Baba Yamim, getting along in days, we knew that from the survivors and the inheritors of Adam and of Moses. We know that they got along in their days and they kept on going until they couldn't go anymore. And then they stopped. But Avraham Zaken got old. That's different. Says Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, that represents the Ziknah of white hair. It represents the Ziknah of bowing a little bit more, as I said before, under the burden of something that was lightly carried before, but it's still a mitzvah, it's still a treasure, it's still noble and still needs to be carried. Zaken means being able to look at somebody and see that that person proceeds and develops and becomes a more well-developed, fragrant character, a fragrant of character. Not just a physical specimen who acts and reacts in that way. There's a reason, after all, says Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, why we so far outlive our reproductive capacity, unlike other biological creatures who reproduce and survive for a little while, and then they survive no more. But what do we continue to give? What do we have to give? One thing that we have to give is character, the development of our character, the development of soul, the development of example to a generation that follows. You see, this is how it's done. Even if your step is a little bit slower, even if your hand shakes a little bit more, this is how you extend it in greeting. This is how you sign your name. This is how you agree to a contract. This is how you uphold yourself as a human being, credible and incredible in some ways, because you keep doing what you do. This is the strength and fortitude that comes with moving on and moving forward. And God says, in Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon's fantasy, God says, I never thought about that before. Well, let me ask you, there are a lot of you out there, and I don't know that this really ought to be a sikha in the sense of a classic conversation between us, but
many people.
I'd love to know. I would love to know from some of you anyway, what you think about that. How extraordinary is that statement that God would say, I never thought about it before, but let's think about it now. What do you think? Let me just demonstrate this Torah of living with cancer one more time for you.
Well, God is ageless. He doesn't have a conception of time that we have.
God is ageless. God doesn't have a conception of
There's
time
no beginning and no end.
that we have. Yeah. God, why would God have thought about it? God has no experience, as it were. If I take X meaning out of and peri from peril, God is in no danger. God has no reason. Experience means out of danger, out of the school of hard knocks. You know, God has no reason to have learned this before or to have thought about it. Jane, what did you want to add?
Probably need to unmute.
Yes, you probably need to unmute.
Okay. Where God says, I never thought of that before, well, you know, that's disingenuous because
God, he knows everything. It's
Oh.
Rabbi, it's the
Rabbi Yehuda?
Rabbi Yehuda who never thought of it before.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Let me suggest that Rabbi Yehuda, at least at the Midrash, has gotten a rise out of me because I believe it, that God never thought about it before. I like that. I like that. I understand what you're saying. And is there a meeting moment where it occurs to Rabbi Yehuda and it occurs to God at the same time, or maybe it already has occurred to God and it occurs to Rabbi Yehuda who dares to ask for it? Perhaps we could see it that way. Let's allow both of those to continue in each other's company. But all of a sudden it sparks for Rabbi Yehuda. This would be an extraordinary thing. And it's not something that happens in the world yet. And he asks of God, or he insists from God, let it happen. And then we have, and only then do we have, a mention of age in the Bible.
Giselle.
Giselle.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's so good to hear you always.
Thank you.
I was thinking about the age, Zaken and Baba Yamim, and the story, and I thought of the end of Moshe's life, where it says "Velo yachol od latzet velavo," that he couldn't fall and get up or go and come back as a defining age, and it seems like the age is defined by what you can do, and it doesn't matter how many years you have. And it seems like God thought about it later on. He didn't maybe think about it with Abraham in the story of that you're telling from the Talmud, but maybe with Moshe is defining age by his, but him being able to do things that he did before, maybe in a different way or in the same way. So
Thank you. It's a very big and very beautiful page for us to investigate. I want to say this idea of aging. Moses, we're told we celebrate his life on the last page of the Torah, right? That he was not dim of vigor or strength in any way. He could still climb mountains, and he could still, at the age of 120, he could go up and he could follow God's command, which was die, and that was it. And yet, just before that, he had said to the people, I can't come and go anymore. I'm 120 years old today, and I can't come and go anymore. The various stories and conceptions that we have about aging they're very interesting to follow for us. But we don't have anything very emotional about it. Perhaps Moses saying, I can't come and go anymore, is about the most emotional thing and the most of an admission of a lack of capacity or a changed capacity. I can't come and go anymore. Rabbi Yehuda ben Simon has taken it off the page a little bit more for us, I think. He has said, look, we need more than statistical aging. We understand from Adam to Noah and from Noah to Abraham that people get old and they die, but that's just statistics. That's not drama. That's not story. That's not development. That's not character. That's not celebration. That's not even admission. If Moses admits, I can't go anymore. We need something more. And he asks of God, and God gives it to him. God says, it'll start with you. And then we have Vavraham Zaken Baba Yamim. Abraham got old, as well as coming along in days, if I can translate it that way. And other midrashim will tell us that his hair turned white and that it became possible to distinguish him from his son Isaac. And before that, nobody could really tell the difference between the two of them. And so all of those wonderful possible affirmations that come, even in the face of the narcissistic impulse, which I have in spades. I keep looking to see at the camera, what do I look like? What do I, how much of my own hair do I have left? What's the time I get on Zoom, I look and see look at that camera, and that camera always, you're not even getting the right look. That's not what they're seeing when you look at the camera that way. How can you depend upon anything? That narcissistic impulse, but conquer that narcissistic impulse, and you find that something important I realize for my children to see a saggier chin. There's something important for my children to hear my voice the way it is. There's something important for them to learn about a kind of strength, perhaps, or resolve that I move into that I didn't have before. I don't have it every minute. The presence of all of you here makes it easier for me to have it right now. But it's the best way for us to proceed, I think. And Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon has something very important in mind when he calls God's attention to what it is that human beings lack at the moment, and that will make us better in the development, in the growth of character, and in the growth of community. Well, it doesn't stop, as you can imagine, with Abraham. It continues on with Isaac. I wonder about the aging of Sarah, Leo Egger says to everybody. What's the commentary about her giving birth to Isaac? Well, that's a story, Leo, for us to try to tell together and to try to piece together from midrashic sources, that is to say, from rabbinic sources, because the Bible tells us precious little about that. And it's another part of the very important story. You have joined forces with Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, who says, dear reader, if you think that you're paying honor to the Bible just by paying attention to its words, to its black spaces, to its black letters, you are incorrect. You must pay attention to its white spaces. You must pay attention to the drama that comes in between, because there are full lives that are being lived out, held together by the slim bonds of this narrative that can barely constrain meaning, breaking out all over the place. What is Sarah life like? What does she look like? What does she feel like being so old and giving birth? And here again, another piece of the story of aging, isn't it? That she is so old and yet she gives birth. And we have this mixed message, this twist of people get old and yet at the same time they don't lose their youthful vigor. What's that supposed to tell us? Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon wants to tell us they get old, we get old, and we lose our youthful vigor. And that's not all bad news, right? That's not all bad news. So, stories of Sarah and stories of Sarah laughing at how it is that everybody will understand that how extraordinary and unusual is this pregnancy. These little hints, we ought to get these little hints. We ought to think about these little hints, and we ought to knit them into the fabric of our own lives. What does it mean to look into the lives of these patriarchs and matriarchs and see ourselves looking back? How is it that that helps us escape what my teacher, Judah Golden, would have called the loneliness of being merely contemporary? We are not merely contemporary. We live in the lives of our ancestors, and they live on strengthening our lives. So here's Abraham, the first to manifest signs of old age, says Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, by sensitively looking at the Bible text and seeing the word zaken appear. The next time that the word zaken appears, it appears in the life story and the drama of Abraham's son Isaac. And here it appears accompanying Isaac's failing vision. Do you remember the story of Isaac's failing vision? A story that is set up. My vision is failing too. I can't see whose dog that is. We're hearing. It's a story that is part of the setup of Jacob coming in and stealing Esau's blessing. Isaac is old and infirm, and his eyesight fails him. Now, can you imagine? Here's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, who's still on the exact same subject, the defense and the blossoming of the aging. And for him, Isaac stands up and says to God, everything's going along just fine, except that a little bit of an infirmity, or maybe even a lot of an infirmity, would not be such bad news for us after all. All right, cancer is quite an infirmity, but still in all, can you learn to live your life in its presence? Can you learn to live your life in the presence of failing eyesight and understand that this is not the tightening of the bow of the attribute of justice? It's not that it was your right up until that moment of your diagnosis or that moment of your first prescription. It wasn't that it was your right to live with 20/20 eyesight after all, and that because you don't live with 20/20 eyesight, the world is not over. I've been holding on to this midrash for a long time and been a traveling companion of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, I think, for a very long time. And I remember when I was, I want to say 45, and I first needed glasses. This was an extraordinary thing and a kind of a blow to me. I had this fantasy idea in my head that somehow I was immune from such deterioration. And part of the reason that I was immune to it, after all, was that my father was an optician. And to get my eyes diagnosed and to get a prescription for glasses and to get glasses would have been a fairly inexpensive proposition. And therefore, of course, I did not need them. But now all of a sudden I did. And I just felt like the world had collapsed. The attribute of justice, that element of the rabbinic consciousness, which tells us that we can't account for everything bad that happens, for everything untoward that happens. And perhaps it goes to pay off some of the principle for the worlds to come. Perhaps it serves us well in the world to come. This is not a theology that works so well for us today. But we can be easy traveling companions with Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, at least for a little while. And we can also understand it better by, well, what I've started to tell you and what I'll tell you now. Even as he says, a little bit of an infirmity would keep the attribute of justice from being less taught against us. Boing! It would be less oppressive for us if we had some infirmity, something in our daily lives with which we had to live. And I remember being 45 years old and carrying around reading glasses in my pocket for the first time and not really wanting anybody to see them, but having a bat mitzvah student who had a haftarah which needed some attention. And I didn't know the entire haftarah by heart. And I remember taking the glasses out of my pocket and putting them on and somehow hoping that she wouldn't notice. But she did notice and she said, "Oh, Rabbi, glasses. I've never seen you wear glasses before." And I said, "Well, this is my first afternoon. I've never worn glasses before. My eyesight's always been very good." And I started to give her some story that, one ought not be giving to a 12-year-old, about my eyesight. And so, and she said, she just cut me off and she said, "Oh, I've been wearing glasses since I was 3. And I realized just then something that Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon was telling me. It's like, it is not this. It is not this. It's not that the attribute of justice is drawn so taut against you, and that if that happens, this diagnosis or this diagnosis or this diagnosis or whatever it is, you learn to live your life in a different key. Don't let the attribute of justice be so tightly wound against you, because that's its own punishment. the attribute of justice, for the attribute of justice to actually come in and whack you upside the head is its own verdict. And we don't have to let it be so. And here is Isaac saying to God, you know, if only we had a little bit of an infirmity, or perhaps even a lot of an infirmity, something with which we had to wrestle, the attribute of justice would take a different place in our lives. It wouldn't be the thing for which we would have to before which we would have to cower, or which would frighten us so much. Oh, what have we done that we have deserved this? No, it's not about deserving it. It's about living a full life. And God says to Isaac, excellent. I've never thought about it before. And let it start with you. And therefore it says, Vatichena einav, his eyes were weak. But it comes right after saying Isaac was old. So now it's the grandfather and it's the father. And there's one patriarch and it's the next patriarch. When conditions are sufficient, one needs eyeglasses, a cancer treatment, or a cane, or whatever it might be. But how do you see yourself in the community if that happens, or when that happens? Because it certainly happens. What are you able to then carry? And in what ways do you need to be carried? These are extraordinary admissions that come. This to me continues to be absolutely celebratory and wonderful. In spite of the fact that God never gave it any thought, despite Jane's very good counter to that maybe the patriarch and God thought about it at the same time. I prefer to think about it in other ways. God never gave it any thought. Why? Because God didn't have to give it any thought. But we have to give it thought. And so we can give it thought. We would prefer, and here's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, my hero, who says, I would rather have given it thought and have God insist through me and through the patriarchs, because who am I after all? I'm a descendant of these patriarchs. And wouldn't it be better to place it in their care and in their lives and in their eyes and in their souls and in their spirits, even though it's moving through mine and certainly through those of my descendants and their descendants and their descendants, it will forever and ever. And they will be forever grateful that Abraham spoke these words and said, we need a differentiation between the generations. And Isaac spoke these words and said, we need a little bit of Yisurin. We need a little bit of something that's oppositional, in order to teach us that this is part of life and that life isn't over when that happens, that these are the conditions with which we are living. So we absolutely need those things, and God would not have thought about it before. To me, it is an important celebration of the capacity of human beings. That human beings are possibly able to set up the conditions for our own continued life and the development of growth and the development of character. God and Isaac come to teach us, and God agrees. This is a God who can be taught. This is not a God who says, nah, it's a bad idea. If it was a good idea, I would have thought about it already. No, in my telling of the story, that is not the case. It is rather the case that God says, okay, I see the wisdom in it. God becomes the creator and the co-partner. And when it comes to the creation, really, the ongoing creation of older age, that God and humans are celebrating what they have in common, which is a capacity to agree and a capacity to think through something and a capacity to be in a moment that was different than the moment before. Well, you can only imagine that if Abraham is the one who champions the difference in the look between generations. And if Isaac is the one who champions the difference between the capacities of one generation and always another, then Jacob also will have a special place in the story. And my eyes are sometimes drawn to the chat, and thanks David Rubin for saying, yeah, my father is a hero of this also. Can we aspire to be heroes of this? I wish at age 45 I had been more of a hero of it, although my little bat mitzvah child was too young probably to have, oh, so you're wearing glasses. Yep, wearing glasses, I would have said, and that would have been the end of it. But I wouldn't have proven anything to her. Perhaps if she had the spirit of Yehuda Bar Simon, maybe in 20 years she would have thought about it. Oh, wow, this was the first time that the rabbi wore glasses, and he took it all in stride. But I didn't have that capacity, and so the moment never came up. But we can imagine that joining our group of heroes would be the third of the patriarchs, who is Jacob. And Jacob says to God, wouldn't it be extraordinary and important if people had a sense that they were mortal? I mean, really a much more of a sense that they were mortal. Surely my grandfather Abraham had a sense, he knew that people died, but they weren't showing any signs of aging. And so he was heading in that direction. And so was my father Isaac, but a real sign, a real letter delivered to my address that says, yes, that you are mortal. Wouldn't that help people to make some kind of disposition with their children? Wouldn't it help them to settle some things? Wouldn't some things become just a little bit or perhaps a lot clearer if that were the case? And God says, as you would imagine already in the story, what a great idea. I've never thought about it before. But let's do it. And it will start with you. And so it is that Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon has noticed something that I will say, you can dispute me with the narratives, there's the academic and me coming out, I can't prove it, but in my version of the story and in our version of the story, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon discovers that the word choleh, that the word sick, in the sense of sick, I mean really sick, end of life illness, appears for the first time at the end of the book of Genesis. When Jacob's servants go to Joseph and they say, Hine avicha choleh, your father is sick. Gisel, I see 5 fingers at the end of your wrist. Oh, was it not? Maybe it was Tommy.
Oh, I'm listening attentively.
Okay.
I was holding my head.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So here it is, a remarkable observation by my hero, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, who sees aging unfolding in this cascade, in this wonderful water tumble from one generation to the next, perfecting an idea of what human aging can be. With Abraham, the word zaken has never been used before, and now it's used for the first time. And with Isaac, the word, any suggestion of infirmity is never used before, and now it's used for the first time in coordination with the word for age. And now with Jacob, the word for illness or final illness in this contextual case is used for the very first time in the Torah and in conjunction with the word for age and with the word for aging eyes, in fact. So 1 and 2 and 3 generations all produce this unfolding story. The aging eye page of Jacob's story is that Joseph eagerly brings his children, Ephraim and Menashe, before the aging patriarch, who, because the enav kavdu mizoken, because his eyes are heavy with age, doesn't make out clearly who they are, Ephraim and Menashe. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon has brought us in some ways full circle into this extraordinary place of human aging. And I would suggest also the development of human character. But more about that in a couple of minutes. Maybe it's your turn. Maybe there are some. Aging is something to be looked forward to be valued.
Is
I have to question everyone's opinion. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes,
is this part of being the chosen people?
it's part of being the chosen people to be aging.
To have this richness of life and experience, and that it's talked about, that before that it's not talked about, and then Abraham is the first Hebrew, and then all these things start unfolding.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Richness of life. This is part of our dedication to reading into the Bible, to reading our stories into the Torah. What an extraordinary enterprise to be able to take a story and to say, that is my story. And it is told through the life of Abraham or Sarah or Rebecca or Rachel or Leah. Stories of aging, stories of motherhood, stories of questioning. These are all stories that have to come out. They're necessary for these stories to come out, and some of them have. And because of that, we need to be, in our tour through the literature of our sages, we need to be vigilant for it to see where they have predicted or where they have foreshadowed our need by saying this is a human need that must be addressed and that is addressed. And so surely am I convinced that it is addressed, that I see it addressed through Sarah and through Rebecca and through Rivka and Leah and through others, through Bilhah and Zilpah. And let's go through all of the Bible heroes that we can go through. And even those heroes who are not so heroic to us, but who maybe could be and should be, maybe the Esau's or the Hamans. Who knows? What's the kind of anguish, the Haman-like anguish that we have? Dare we, especially in our day, dare we completely otherize the other? Completely? I hope not. Maybe we haven't reached a place where we can, I don't know, diminish their power of otherness so much. We do, after all, still need, the truth is, we still need the other in our lives, the confrontation in our lives. And we do see the attribute of justice, but does it have to be so taught against us? Does it have to be its own punishment?
Rabbi,
Yes.
just a comment on Esau and also Ishmael. It's even though they were rejected because Jacob and was to be the one and Isaac were to be the one who were to carry forth the faith, it would have been so easy to say good riddance, but in fact, I feel that Tanakh shows tremendous compassion towards them. And you often feel more sorry for them than for the ones who remained. More compassion.
Well, I think so. I think so. And thank you for the beautiful observation. And the truth is that it moves me every year, every time through the Torah, when we reach the names of the descendants of those ancestors of ours, the Torah treats them with some care, with a lot of care. And if their names are not properly spelled in the Torah is just as unkosher as if the name of Abraham or Isaac or God himself, herself, was misspelled in the Torah. So yeah, the stories of our ancestors are extremely important. But the story of the white spaces, important as well, because it tells not only the story of our ancestors, but allows us to tell our story and to be told into the stories, so that Yehuda Bar Simon becomes the hero. And I get to see that in the 3rd century, there was a sage who thought about aging in a particular way. And I see myself as thinking about aging in that way. And I will tell you that I hope you explore it for yourself, but I don't see it as being merely a function of my 69 years. I can remember being a little boy and being in awe of age. Age was its own ontological category. It was its own mythic category, you know, from the aged mirror to the piece of furniture, to the inscrutable will of the wizard or of the wizard's staff or whatever it might be. I was always somebody who was intrigued by the fact that aging had more in it than anybody could imagine, and that one could be a co-partner in the bringing forth of the wisdom of aging.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I like to separate old from aging. Old is a category we apply to ourselves and others apply to us. It's a categorization, whereas aging can also be differentiated from being old or getting old, at least in one's own mind. And it's more of a process and also more of a process, as opposed to being old, which, okay, you have now reached this level of life, you are now forevermore old.
Yes.
Whether you consider yourself aging or not.
Yes. Yes. Extraordinary. You've reached to the number at which point the Western medical system or some other system has, or Kroger's, has decided that you are that you are now old, and you can be old at Kroger's and not be old at the Carolina Theater, you know, or maybe it's vice versa. Right? As opposed to the dynamism of aging. And maybe that's part of what Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon carries about with him and part of what he projects onto Abraham. That, yes, of course, from Adam to Noah and from Noah to Abraham, there are these statistical accounts. You know, we know that people live a certain number of years and have a certain number of children, and then they are no more, they die off and so on. But the dramas, but the story, the dynamic process of the aging and the changing, that's not something that we have. Those stories are stiff and untold in the early generations where people just simply drop off. And they don't need to be, because there's so much wonderful aging that comes in after all, and not just reaching the category and there you are at the zenith.
Rabbi Siegel,
Yes.
I'd have to say, you know, about aging and kind of piggyback on that a little bit. You know, what society, you know, puts on us. Like, I remember getting my going to the mailbox when I turned 50, my AARP card in the mail, and standing outside my mailbox for 5-10 minutes, and my wife calls me, says, "What's going on, Elliot? How many days?" I'm looking at it like, "Am I really that old?" You know, in societies, you know, very old instead of the process. You know, true story.
That's right. I open my mailbox and suddenly I'm old. That's very interesting.
Rabbi, I would like to say something. This is Faye.
Yes,
May I say something, Rabbi?
please. Of course.
First of all, I want to say you are a very young lad as far as I'm concerned. Don't call yourself old. 69? Oh my gosh, I'd like to get back there, number one. Number two, Chazaku Baruch, you always give the best lectures. But I would like to add this. I think, for me at least, any illness or even aging or everything that has happened to my body in my lifetime, it took time to get used to. It's not, it doesn't, you know, just one day we get up and find ourselves old or find ourselves sick or find things do happen, and it takes our brain time to get there. And I think in a very simplified way, I would tell you my thinking about Akadosh Baruch Hu and Rabbi Shimon, it's Rabbi Bar Shimon that you mentioned, yes?
Yes.
Rabbi Bar Shimon, I think when he says that he didn't know about getting old or being a zaken, he was actually learning, like all of us have learned. If indeed we are made in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he has not actually given us all he didn't write everything down for us, how we were going to cope with life and with what's happening to us. He actually let us find out for ourselves a lot, as we still are finding out. And it's the same thing for illness and the same thing for aging, at least as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for listening.
I appreciate what you're saying, and in some ways you're a traveling companion of Jane Gaben. I would say that everybody has, that people have these insights at the moment that God has the insights, It is our unfolding consciousness, let's say. It's the glory of our unfolding consciousness. And we should keep on keeping it on. There are heroes, after all, of aging. And Faye, you are certainly one. And Errol, you are certainly one. And it seems to me that we are all certainly those heroes of aging, if only we would look. Sometimes we stop, sometimes we think that invalid is invalid. Invalid is not a category that ought to be useful for us in our teaching. And I bring you this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon because, well, I think he has done us a marvelous service. He has at least done me a marvelous service, allowing me to look into the lives of my ancestors and stories that are so deeply told that they somehow don't need to be told, or they're not told in words, but they are told in the lives of people who continue to develop and continue to grow and continue to age and continue to be heroic. And he has brought these stories to light in a way that make me ever grateful to him and grateful to be a student of his and interested in continuing to be a student of his who will look for other signs and other developments and other enrichments and to enjoy all of my traveling companions. Well, we need to stop, I think, because in the main room at 5 o'clock, in just a couple of minutes, there will be a presentation of the Avodah service, and I think it's worth looking at. Thank you for joining me. I'm so used to and so pleased to be sitting in the back of the sanctuary still, between where the permanent seats are and where the impermanent seats are, which is my recollection of the sanctuary, the Beth El sanctuary of old, right where the old meets the new. That's just where we need to be. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yossi, Steve. Yashikar.